I was somewhere over the Atlantic, 30,000 feet above everything that could hurt me, when my husband's sister used my bakery to pay off her husband's gambling debt. By the time my flight landed, the locks had been changed, and there was a stranger behind my counter. "You can bake anywhere," my mother-in-law told me. I smiled. "Why are you smiling?" she snapped, I said quietly. "Because the business you handed over wasn't actually hers to take." And that's when the room went silent in the worst possible way for them. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 6 years, the most honest thing in my life has been a 1,400 square foot bakery on the corner of Mercer and 5th in a mid-sized Ohio city that used to smell like machine oil and is now apparently charming enough to be featured in weekend travel blogs. The shop is called Flour and Memory. I named it that because my grandmother named everything after what it cost her, and this cost me everything I had. My grandmother came here from Guadalajara with $40, a suitcase held shut with a belt, and a recipe for pan dulce that she never wrote down because she said the hands already knew. She worked in a hotel laundry for 11 years. She saved in cash she kept folded inside a Bible she couldn't read but carried anyway. When she died, she left me $18,000 and a note that said, in her looping cursive, "Make something that stays." I was 24. I had a culinary certificate, 3 years of working other people's kitchens, and enough stubbornness to be dangerous. I found the space on Mercer through a real estate listing that described it as raw potential, which is what listings say when a place looks like a crime scene. I signed the lease myself. I renovated mostly by hand with 2 friends who owed me favors. I registered the business in my name, obtained all the licenses in my name, and opened on a Tuesday in March, with 12 varieties of pastry and exactly 1 customer for the first 2 hours, who turned out to be the landlord checking if I'd actually shown up. 6 years later, Flour and Memory had a line out the door on weekend mornings, a wholesale account with 4 local restaurants, a small but loyal online following, and a waiting list for custom wedding cakes that stretched 4 months out. It was not glamorous. It was flour under my nails, and 4:30 alarms, and a lower back that had opinions about standing on concrete for 10 hours. But it was mine, in a way that nothing before it had ever been. I married Daniel 3 years ago. Daniel is kind and steady, and has a laugh that starts slow and then takes over a whole room. His family is a different weather system entirely. His mother, Patricia, runs the family the way certain people run HOAs with complete authority and no actual power except the kind everyone agrees to pretend she has. She has an opinion about everything, delivers it as fact, and considers disagreement a form of disrespect. She is not cruel exactly. She is the kind of woman who genuinely believes she is always helping, which makes her almost impossible to argue with because the intention is always technically good. His sister, Renee, is 35 and has been in some form of crisis for most of the decade I've known her. Not the kind of crisis that builds character, the kind that needs someone nearby to absorb the damage. Her husband, Todd, is the kind of man who calls bad decisions calculated risks and has never once been the one who paid the price for them. Together, they are a system for generating chaos that lands on other people. Daniel knew all of this. He loves his family the way you love a place that was hard to grow up in, with loyalty that lives right next to exhaustion. We had agreements. The bakery was mine. My finances were separate. I had made this before him, and I would protect it with the same stubbornness that built it. The trip to Portugal was a gift I gave myself for the bakery's 6th anniversary. 12 days. Lisbon and the Algarve coast. I had never taken more than 4 consecutive days off in 6 years, and my manager, a woman named Deb, who had been with me since year 2 and ran the floor better than I ever could, told me if I didn't take a real vacation, she would quit just to spite me. I booked it. I left detailed binders. I trusted Deb. I told Daniel I needed this to be a trip where I did not check sales reports. Daniel couldn't come. A job project he couldn't move. I went alone, which turned out to be the exact right thing because I spent 12 days eating pastries I hadn't made, sitting in the sun with a book, and feeling my shoulders drop back to a height that human shoulders are supposed to occupy. I sketched new recipe ideas in a notebook. I called Deb twice, briefly. I felt, for the first time in years, like a person rather than a function. I landed at Columbus on a Thursday afternoon with a full notebook, a mild sunburn, and approximately 4 wheels of cheese I was not entirely sure I was allowed to bring through customs. The drive back into the city felt familiar in the good way. The skyline, the particular gray of the highway, the exit that meant I was almost home. I drove past Mercer on instinct, the way you always do when something is yours just to see it, just to confirm it exists. The lights were off. That was wrong. Thursday afternoons we were open until 6. It was 4:15. I slowed down. There was a sign in the window I hadn't put there. A hand-lettered card, the kind you print at a copy shop, that said, "Under new management." I parked badly. I got out. I stood on the sidewalk and read those 3 words approximately 9 times, waiting for them to mean something different. They didn't. I tried my key in the door. It didn't turn. I knocked. A woman I had never seen in my life came to the door and looked at me through the glass with polite confusion. I pressed my hand flat to the window and said, loudly enough to come through, "This is my bakery." She opened the door 2 inches. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "I was told the previous owner transferred the business." Previous owner. I said the words back to her, like they were in a foreign language. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. "There was a transfer of operations document," she said. "Signed last week." I hadn't signed anything. I was in Portugal. My hands were full of cheese, and this woman was telling me I no longer owned the thing my grandmother's money built. My phone showed 14 missed calls. Daniel, Patricia. Renee's number twice, which she never called me from directly because Renee communicated almost exclusively through Daniel as a relay system. One text from Daniel that said, "Call me before you go to the bakery," which I had obviously not done. I called him standing on the sidewalk. He answered on the first ring, which told me he'd been waiting. Claire. He said my name the way people say it when they know the next sentence is going to land wrong. "I need you to stay calm. Tell me what happened to my bakery," I said. My voice was steady in the way that things are steady right before they aren't. He exhaled. Renee and Todd had a situation. A serious one. Todd's debt? It got to a place where there were people involved that you don't want involved. Mom panicked. She thought she told Renee that the bakery could be used as a temporary collateral arrangement. "I was in another country," I said. He was quiet. "They used a document," he said. "From when you added Renee to your catering insurance 2 years ago, Mom found someone who I don't know the details, Claire. But it looks like they used your signature from that document." I stood on the curb outside my own bakery and felt the specific cold of something being done to you while you were somewhere you felt safe. Not robbery, worse than robbery, impersonation. I had been replaced, on paper, without my knowledge, while I was eating pastries in Lisbon and thinking about how lucky I was. I called my lawyer before I called Patricia back. Her name is Sandra, and I had hired her 3 years earlier when I was drafting the bakery's wholesale contracts. She is the kind of lawyer who doesn't use 5 words when 3 will do and doesn't make you feel better, only clearer. I left a voicemail that laid out the facts in order. Transfer document. Forged authorization. Business I own registered in my name. Back in the country today. She called me within the hour. "Send me everything you have," she said. Business registration. Your original lease. Any documents you've signed in the last 2 years that include your signature. Don't contact the person in the space until I tell you. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything verbally. "Can they do this?" I asked. "What they did is a crime," she said. Flat. Like a fact about weather. The question is, what was actually transferred? Because there are limits to what they could have conveyed without you. In Sandra's office the next morning, she had already pulled the documents from the county recorder and the state business registry. She walked me through it with the same energy she probably used, explaining closing arguments to a jury, no drama, just structure. The transfer document was fraudulent on its face. They had used a signature from the catering insurance writer and lifted it into a business operations transfer form, which is not how either of those documents work, and which any actual business attorney would have caught immediately. The person who had processed it was not a business attorney. He was a notary with a flexible relationship to due diligence, who had apparently done similar work for Todd before. But here was the part that mattered. Here was the part that Sandra told me with the specific satisfaction of someone delivering a legal fact that functions like a trapdoor opening beneath the people who deserved it. The bakery's business license, its health department certifications, its wholesale permits, and its brand trademark. I had filed a trademark on the flour and memory name 18 months earlier on the advice of a business consultant who told me to do it and whom I had almost not listened to. None of these transferred. They were not transferable by the document that was used. The business registration remained in my name. The lease remained in my name, and my landlord, a retired schoolteacher named Frank, who liked my almond croissants and took a certain grim pleasure in legal technicalities, had not been contacted or consulted and had not consented to any assignment. What Renee and Todd had managed to do was hand someone the keys to a building they didn't own the rights to operate in. The woman behind my counter was running a business. She had no legal authorization to run, using a name she had no right to use, under licenses that were still registered to me. They gave someone an empty box, Sandra said, and told her it was a bakery. She filed a cease and desist to the new operator, a notice to my landlord, and a formal complaint with the state business registry by noon. By 2 o'clock, Patricia called 16 times. I sat in my car in the parking garage and watched her name appear and disappear on my screen and thought about all the times I had answered quickly because it felt rude not to. I let it ring. They came to our house the next evening without calling. Patricia, Renee, and Todd. Daniel let them in because he is, at his core, someone who still believes that families should be able to sit in rooms together and solve things. I came downstairs and stood in the doorway of the living room and did not sit down, which Patricia noticed and which seemed to unsettle her more than anything I could have said. "This has gotten completely out of hand," she announced, as if she were the narrator of the situation rather than a participant in it. "You were gone," she said, the word gone carrying some implication that my absence was itself a kind of negligence. Renee was in trouble. We had to do something. "You forged my name," I said. Renee made a sound. Todd looked at the floor. Patricia's chin lifted a full centimeter. "We used what was available," she said, "for family. That's called fraud," I said. "It has a legal name." Patricia's expression shifted into the particular arrangement she used when she felt she was being dramatic. "You're catastrophizing," she said. "Sandra is not catastrophizing," I said. Sandra was my lawyer. I was simply telling the truth. "This is fixable," Patricia said. She said it the way people say things they want to be true enough to make true by saying them. "You can bake anywhere. This is one location. We are talking about Renee's marriage, her safety, her children's stability." She moved down the list of Renee's stakes like a PowerPoint presentation. Todd's debt, the people involved, the danger to the family name, the money owed. At some point, she came around to me again and said, with the tone of someone offering a generous concession, "We'll find you another space, something newer, better equipment." "A replacement," I said evenly. "Like you're buying me a new grandmother?" Renee looked up. Even she understood what I meant, which surprised me. Todd cleared his throat. "The woman who took over," he started. "She paid real money for this. You pull the license and you're destroying her too. She paid real money for something that wasn't yours to sell," I said. "That's a problem you created, not one I'm responsible for cleaning up." Patricia leaned forward. "You can bake anywhere," she repeated, slower this time, as if I'd failed to understand a reasonable point the first 2 times. "The location is nothing. It's flour and sugar and an oven." I looked at her. Flour and sugar and an oven and 6 years and my grandmother's money and my lower back and 4:30 in the morning for 2,000 consecutive mornings. I did not say any of that. I said, "We're done talking about this without Sandra present." Patricia's mouth pressed flat. "You're doing this to punish Renee," she said. "You've never liked her. You've always kept the bakery separate, because you never trusted this family." "I kept the bakery separate," I said, "because I built it before I was part of this family, and I knew the difference between what was mine and what was ours." Daniel was quiet through most of this. I understood why. He was sitting in the gap between 2 things he loved, and there was no comfortable position in that gap. Later, after they left, he sat at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands. "I didn't know what they were going to do," he said. "I know," I said. I sat across from him. "But I need to know what you're going to do now." He looked at me. "I'm on your side," he said. And he meant it. I knew he meant it. But I also knew that being on someone's side is not the same thing as being willing to stand in the place where it costs something. Sandra arranged for the meeting at the bakery. Not for sentiment. For positioning, for witnesses, for the moment when the documents would become real to people who had been treating them as suggestions. It was a Saturday morning because I wanted the foot traffic. I wanted my regulars to see. The woman who had taken over her name was Jenny, and she was not a villain. She was someone who had been deceived the same as I had. She had paid Todd directly, in cash, for what she believed was a legitimate business transfer, was there when we arrived. Frank, the landlord, was there. A representative from the state licensing office was there because Sandra had managed to schedule a site visit with impressive efficiency. Patricia and Renee and Todd arrived late, together, in Todd's truck, which had a dent in the front quarter panel that had been there since Christmas and that I had stopped not noticing. Patricia looked at the group assembled on the sidewalk and did what she always did when outnumbered by facts. She smiled. "This is excessive," she said. "You got lawyers involved in a family matter? You committed fraud in a family matter," Sandra said, without heat. She was holding a folder. She did not open it yet. Todd started talking first. He was always the one who started talking when he was nervous, filling space with words the way some people fill space with furniture. The debt, the timeline, the investment that was supposed to pay out, the person they owed, the urgency, the temporary nature of the arrangement, how it was never meant to be permanent, how Renee needed him, how he had a plan. Sandra let him talk. She was very good at letting people talk themselves into their own corners. When he finished, she opened the folder. She laid the trademark registration on the sidewalk-level windowsill, then the lease assignment clause that required written landlord consent. Frank touched it with 2 fingers and nodded. Then the licensing documents, each one registered to me, none transferable by a private operations document. "The business name is trademarked," Sandra said. "The lease requires landlord consent for assignment, which was not given. The licenses are non-transferable by the mechanism used. The transfer document itself contains a signature that does not belong to the person who was claimed to have signed it." She looked at Todd. "What you conveyed was the physical presence in a space you did not have the right to convey. Everything that makes this bakery a business still belongs to Claire." Renee made a sound I had not heard from her before, not crying exactly, something quieter and more final than that. Patricia's jaw moved. She turned to me the way she always turned to me when she wanted the rules to bend. "You can bake anywhere," she said. It came out smaller this time, like she knew finally that it wasn't landing. Like she was saying it because it was the only thing she had left. I smiled. Todd's voice came out sharp, panicked. "What's funny?" he demanded. "What is actually funny to you right now?" And because the moment had arrived, the one Sandra had told me would come, the one I'd been waiting for through 14 missed calls and 2 days of sitting with the specific nausea of having something taken from you by people who ate at your table, I said very quietly, "The business you handed over." I stopped. I let it sit. Patricia's eyes went careful. "What about it?" "Was never legally hers to operate." Sandra took it from there, precise and unhurried. "The trademark, the lease, the licenses, the fraud complaint already filed with the state, the notice to the person who had processed the transfer document, the civil liability Todd had created by accepting money from Jenny for something he didn't own." With each sentence, I watched Todd's face do something I had never seen it do. He was a man accustomed to consequences arriving for other people. The experience of being the one they were arriving for appeared to be genuinely new to him. Renee grabbed his arm. Patricia turned away from the group and looked at the bakery window, and for a moment I saw something on her face that was not the usual armor. Just the face of someone who had done a thing and not understood that things have weight until the weight showed up. "This is your family," Patricia said, turning back. "We made a mistake." "You made a crime," Sandra said. "The distinction matters." Jenny, to her credit, had been standing to the side this whole time with her arms folded and the expression of someone who had been handed a problem she did not create and was now calmly deciding what to do with it. She pulled a copy of the transfer document from her own folder. "I want to know who I can sue," she said to Sandra, looking directly at Todd. Sandra handed her a card. Before the state complaint was resolved, before the licensing office finished its review, before the notary lost his certification, and he did, That came later. Todd called me. Not through Daniel. Directly. His voice had lost the particular energy of someone who believed they could still redirect the outcome. He sounded like someone standing in the rubble of a plan and trying to figure out how to describe the rubble as something else. Jenny's threatening to take me to civil court, he said. The money she paid me, I already used it. I don't have it. And the debt? The people I owe? They're not patient. I know, I said. I need you to write a letter, he said. Told Jenny. Explaining that you're withdrawing the complaint, that you're settling privately, that the transfer was… No, I said. He paused. Renee is scared, he said. Her kids are scared. Renee should have been scared before you forged my name, I said. My kids have nothing to do with this, he said, heat cracking into his voice. Don't make this about my kids. I'm not making anything about anything, I said. You made the choices. I'm just not absorbing them. He was quiet for a moment. You're destroying my family, he said. Todd, I said, with more patience than he deserved. Your family was already being destroyed. You were just doing it with my assets instead of your own. I hung up. At the state review, the licensing officer restored my operational status before the end of the week. Sandra filed the formal fraud complaint, which triggered an investigation that moved with surprising efficiency, given that the notary in question had a file with the state that had prior concerns attached to it. Jenny received a partial restitution from Todd's seized account, which was not full restitution but was the beginning of one. The woman who had been behind my counter was someone who had been wronged by the same person who wronged me, and I found I couldn't be angry at her the way the situation might have suggested. We had coffee once, in a different cafe, and she told me she'd been trying to get out of her corporate job for 5 years before Todd presented what looked like an opportunity. I should have had a lawyer look at it, she said. Anyone buying a business should, I said. That's not your fault for not knowing. It's his fault for exploiting it. The morning I went back into Flower and Memory for the first time after the restoration, Deb was already there. She had come in 2 hours early, which she did not announce and did not explain, and the cases were stocked, and the ovens were running, and the smell was exactly the smell it was supposed to be. Brown, butter, and cardamom, and the particular sweetness of dough that has proofed exactly long enough. I stood in the doorway for a moment. The display case caught the morning light the way it always did, the way I had arranged it to do years ago when I figured out that the angle of the east window hit the second shelf at 8 a.m. and made everything on it look like it had been thought about. The stool behind the counter was the one I had bought from a restaurant supply auction in my first month. With a crack in the leg I had reinforced with a metal bracket because I couldn't afford to replace it, and then never replaced it even after I could, because it felt like evidence of something. I went to it and put my hand on the bracket and let myself feel what I hadn't let myself feel for 4 days, which was the particular grief of almost losing a thing and the particular gratitude of not quite having lost it. Not the same thing, different from each other in ways that matter. Daniel was waiting at home when I got back that evening. He had made dinner, which he did when he didn't know what else to offer, and which I had come to understand was his version of an apology that knew it wasn't enough but was trying anyway. We sat at the table and ate, and were quiet in the way that two people are quiet when they are deciding something without having to say they are deciding it. My mother called me, he said. I know, I said. She wants me to. She thinks if you drop the complaint, Todd could manage the debt another way, and Renee would Daniel, I said. He stopped. I know, he said. I know. We sat with it. Are we okay? He asked. I looked at him. Honestly, looked at him. The person who had laughed at my terrible early batches of croissants and driven me to the supply warehouse at 6 a.m. and cried at our wedding with such complete unself-consciousness that 3 separate guests had come to me, afterward, to say how much they liked him. I don't know yet, I said. It was the truest thing I could say. He nodded. He could hold truth. That was something. Patricia came to the bakery 6 weeks later. Not during a busy hour. She came on a Tuesday afternoon when the line was gone, and the shop was in that particular quiet between the morning rush and the afternoon one. She sat at the small table by the window, the one with the wobbly leg that I kept meaning to fix, and ordered a coffee and one of the almond croissants, and did not look at me directly for the first 3 minutes. When she did look at me, her face had rearranged itself into something I didn't have a name for. Not remorse exactly. Not the performance of remorse. Something that looked more like the experience of seeing a thing clearly for the first time and finding the view uncomfortable. "The croissant is good," she said. "Thank you," I said. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. "I told Renee what she wanted to hear," she said. "For a long time. She made bad choices, and I told her they were understandable. I told her Todd would figure it out. I made it easier for her not to face it. I didn't say anything. I thought you would give in," she said. "I thought when it came to it, you would. You always seem to manage. I thought you would find a way to manage this too." "I did find a way," I said. "Not the one you meant." She looked at her cup. "I called you practical once," she said, "behind your back. I meant it as an insult." I said nothing. "I don't think it is one," she said. "Not anymore." She finished the croissant. She left a 20 on the table for a $7 order, which was not an apology, but was something, and she walked out without the chin, lifted the way it always was, and I watched her go through the glass and felt something release in me that I hadn't known was still held. I called my grandmother's sister that night. My great-aunt Rosario, who is 81 and lives in Phoenix and speaks in a combination of Spanish and English that shifts based on which language has the right word for what she means. I told her what had happened. I told her about Portugal and the sign in the window, and Sandra and the licensing documents, and the stool with the bracket and coming back. She was quiet for a moment. "Your grandmother would have liked this story," she said. "Why?" I asked. "Because she always said the best revenge is staying," Rosario said. "Not going somewhere else. Staying. In the place. In the work. In your own name." I stayed on the line for a while after that, not talking, just listening to the sound of her television in the background and the particular quiet of a phone call with someone old enough to know that some silences are the whole point. The forgery investigation closed with findings that I am not at liberty to detail here, but which resulted in Todd facing consequences that were not my doing and not my satisfaction to describe, except to say that they were proportionate in the way that consequences rarely are, and therefore felt, when I heard about them, like something close to justice, which is different from satisfaction but lasts longer. Renee and I are not close. We may never be. But she sent me a message 3 months after everything settled, and it said only, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix it. I just needed to say it." I read it twice. I didn't respond for 4 days. When I did, I wrote back, "I know." 2 words. Everything they needed to be. The bakery is still on Mercer and 5th. The line is still out the door on weekend mornings. The stool is still there with its bracket. Last spring I added a small plaque near the register, the kind you engrave at the hardware store, that says "Flower and Memory, Est, by Claire," in honor of Elena Reyes, who made something that stayed. My grandmother's name in a place that carries it. That's the thing about building something real. You can't forge the history of it. You can take the keys. You can change the locks. You can put your name on the window. But the thing itself, the work and the years and the hands that made it, that belongs to whoever it came from. And no document in the world can transfer that.